As the Second Punic War raged on, Hannibal marched uncontested across Italy. Following two great defeats in the battles of Trebia and Lake Trasimene, the Romans were wary of another engagement. Fabius Maximus, known as the Delayer, shadowed Hannibal, never allowing his troops to fall into a trap. But these months of inaction were degrading for the proud Romans, and following the end of his term in office, the Romans gathered their largest army yet. In 216 BC, 8 legions with 8 accompanying alii, upwards of 80,000 troops, marched under the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. This massive army met Hannibal and his 50,000 troops near Cannae, a small fortress in southern Italy. Against all odds, Hannibal managed to encircle the Romans and completely destroy their army. Best estimates put the Roman casualties at around 50,000, while Hannibal lost only around 5,000. Rather than marching directly on Rome, Hannibal made some delay to allow his men to rest. According to some Roman authors, this was the only reason Rome survived this great disaster. But it's unlikely that Hannibal could actually threaten the great walls of Rome. Slowly, the Romans started recovering from the shock of this disaster and took practical measures to defend the city. The minimum property requirements for serving in the military were lowered to allow poorer citizens to serve. Many 17-year-olds were also enlisted. Soon, at least 4 legions were gathered in Rome. Household slaves were promised freedom in return for their service. As many as 8,000 volunteered for the military. Another 6,000 men were gathered from among criminals and debtors. They were promised amnesty in return for their service. Remnants of the high command, including Varro, were recalled to the city. Varro was commended by the Senate for his actions after the battle, namely regrouping the survivors and refusing to deal with Hannibal. He would go on to hold military command for the rest of his career, but he would never again lead a Roman army in battle. Times again called for a dictator, and Marcus Junius Pera was elected, with Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus as his master of horse. By the end of 216, Pera was able to lead an army of 25,000 strong out of the city. A far cry from the massive force gathered at the start of the year, but a capable fighting force nonetheless. Previous commanders, namely Gaius Flaminius, the architect of the disaster at Trasimene, neglected their religious duties. The Senate now took great care to honor all the necessary traditions. 2 Vestal virgins were buried alive for breaking their vow of chastity. The Sibylline books, the ancient books of prophecy dating back to the monarchy, were consulted. As a result, a rare instance of human sacrifice was performed in Rome. A pair of Greeks and Gauls were buried alive in the city. Fabius Pictor was sent to Delphi to consult the famous oracle of Apollo. Numerous offerings were presented to the gods, and all sorts of omens were carefully observed. When Pera left the city for military business in Campania, Varro appointed another man, Marcus Fabius Buteo, as a co-dictator. This was highly unusual, as this is the only instance of 2 dictators serving at the same time in Roman history. Buteo was the oldest ex-censor still alive, and he was chosen to fill vacancies in the Senate left by the disaster at Cannae. Buteo was uncomfortable with this appointment, and he resigned as soon as his task was completed. On the other hand, Hannibal had finally achieved his primary goal. After the extent of the disaster at Cannae circulated among the Italians, a large number of communities flocked to his side. Nearly all of Samnium and Bruttium, large parts of Apulia, and shockingly, the formerly loyal Greeks of Campania all betrayed Rome. Capua was at that point one of the greatest cities in Italy, second only to Rome itself. The Capuans had Roman citizenship, but without the right to vote or hold magistracies. Hannibal guaranteed their freedom from Carthage, and the Capuans hoped to become the masters of Italy once Rome was defeated. The loss of this crucial ally was a hard blow to the Romans. The Gauls in the north were still in open revolt. Following Hiero's death in 215, Syracuse joined the Carthaginian cause, followed by Philip V of Macedon a year later. The situation looked bleak for Rome, and it seemed only a matter of time before they would succumb to these mounting pressures. With Cannae, Polybius ends his continuous narrative. His later books, describing the later years of the war, are lost to history. We must now turn to Livy, who discusses these years in great detail. Unfortunately, his account is often unreliable. Many of the great battles he describes seem to be no more than small skirmishes. It's possible that his sources were tainted by exaggerations made by senatorial families, hoping to insert themselves into the narrative. Following the 3 great battles in Italy, the war devolved into fighting for control of key strategic points, with the Romans avoiding pitched battles at all costs. The strategies developed by the delayer were now wholeheartedly accepted among the upper command. It is therefore harder to construct a detailed narrative of the war, and we can only follow the major events. The war was now spreading out of Italy, but we will first examine Hannibal's movements on the peninsula and later tackle the Spanish, Sicilian, and Greek theaters. Hannibal arrived in Campania late in 216 BC. Although Capua did join his side, others were less eager to betray Rome. He attempted to storm Naples and Nola, but he was unsuccessful. Both cities stayed loyal to Rome, and Hannibal refused to commit large forces to the assault. He retreated to his winter quarters in Capua. While waiting for the next campaigning season, he besieged the nearby Casilinum, an important fortress on the river Volturnus, commanding the northern passes along the Via Appia and the Via Latina. Although a Roman army under Gracchus tried to resupply them, they ran out of food and surrendered to Hannibal. The city was given to Capua for defense, and Hannibal marched out of the area. In 215, Romans selected the former master of horse, Sempronius Gracchus, and Lucius Postumius Albinus as consuls. Postumius was elected in absentia, having been sent to Cisalpine Gaul to deal with the rebelling boy. However, before he could take office, he was ambushed and his army was annihilated. Postumius was beheaded, and his skull was gilded and used as a cup in ritual ceremonies for years to come. Out of the 20,000 men, only a few reached Rome to bring the news of yet another disaster. Fabius Maximus was elected in his place. In times of crisis, the Romans abandoned the mandatory 10-year gap between consulships. This was no exception, and several men would go on to serve multiple times in quick succession, including Fabius Maximus, Sempronius Gracchus, and two more notable generals of the time, Marcus Claudius Marcellus and Quintus Fulvius Flaccus. Additionally, they would all continue leading their armies after their term in office expired as pro-magistrates. This gave the Roman command some much-needed continuity. All these men were of an older generation, in their 50s and 60s. The heavy losses suffered by the senatorial class was hard to replace. Many experienced men in their prime were slain on the fields of Cannae, and most of the potential consuls of that generation were wiped out. The Romans had no other choice but to turn to the generals of the previous generation, battle-hardened on the rugged terrain of Sicily. The Romans raised 14 legions that year, most of whom were scattered across Italy within city garrisons and smaller raiding parties. As previously noted, they avoided gathering a large army in one place. Part of this force was deployed in Spain, Sicily, and to a lesser extent Macedonia. In these places far away from Hannibal, the Romans had more confidence in fighting pitched battles, and the men were more concentrated. By 211 BC, the Romans would field as many as 25 legions, or upwards of 100,000 men, along with a similar number of allied troops. The main problem Hannibal now faced was defending his new allies. Although many communities joined his side, his armies didn't see a noticeable increase. The Italians were afraid of Roman reprisal and were unwilling to commit a large number of troops to the cause. This meant that Hannibal's once strong army was frequently needed to repel the Romans. But as soon as Hannibal closed in, the Romans scattered and some other city fell under siege. Hannibal's allies were unhappy with the speed of his responses, while he rushed across southern Italy to put out fires on all sides. For the first few years after Cannae, the Romans focused their efforts mainly on Campania. In 215, Fabius and Gracchus marched into the area, but without any success. The following year, Fabius, covered by Marcellus, successfully recaptured Casilinum, opening the way to Capua. During this time, Hannibal repeatedly tried to take Nola, but he was repelled each time. Gradually, Hannibal was losing his hold over Campania. Back in 216, after the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal sent his brother Mago to Carthage to bring news and request aid. Mago presented countless gold rings of Roman equestrians as proof of the great success on the plains of Cannae. He requested provisions and reinforcements from the Senate. An old enemy of their father and the leader of the anti-war faction, Hanno the Great, argued against sending aid to Italy. However, the pro-Barca faction still held sway in the Senate, and they agreed to dispatch 4,000 Numidian cavalry and 40 war elephants. Mago was also instructed to raise an additional 20,000 troops. While gathering this army, the Carthaginians got the news of a heavy defeat suffered by Hasdrubal in Iberia. Instead of aiding Hannibal, Mago and his army were redirected to Spain, while the Numidians and the elephants, along with some provisions and silver, were sent to Italy. This would be the only assistance Hannibal received from his state during all his long years of campaigning in Italy. Following the third failed attempt to capture Nola in 214, Hannibal received a delegation from Tarentum. They claimed that the city would defect to his side once his army approached the walls. Eager to secure a large port in Italy, Hannibal marched south immediately, but once he approached the city, no help came from within and he had to retreat. 2 years later, in 212, he would get another opportunity when a group of young aristocrats offered him the city. They were promised the same terms as Capua. Tarentum was guaranteed freedom from Carthage, while Hannibal would take the Roman garrison as captives. Hannibal picked a body of 10,000 men and marched them towards the city under the cover of darkness. The conspirators opened the gates and admitted the army into the city. While most of the defenders on the walls were easily dealt with, the bulk of the Roman garrison remained safe within the citadel. Hannibal tried to take it by direct assault, but he failed. Content with the men trapped inside the city, he left the Tarentines in charge of the blockade. The loss of Tarentum, yet another strong city in the south, was a heavy blow to the Romans. Nonetheless, they remained unshaken and chose to mount a full-scale assault on Capua. Since 215, the Romans had been sending raiding parties to burn crops before the harvesting seasons, putting a strain on the Greek supplies. Now, in 212, both consuls, Quintus Fulvius Flaccus and Appius Claudius Pulcher, marched into Campania and set up a blockade of the city. In response, Hannibal only sent 2,000 cavalry with promises of further help in the future. The Capuan cavalry was always a capable fighting force. With the help of the Numidian detachments, they won several small skirmishes on the flat plains of Campania. However, these small victories were not enough to prevent a Roman blockade, and Hannibal had no choice but to march to Capua. He offered battle immediately upon his arrival, but the fighting was indecisive. The Roman consuls marched off in the opposite directions, forcing Hannibal to go after only one of them. After calling off the pursuit, Hannibal stumbled upon a Roman army commanded by a centurion, Marcus Centenius. The army was completely destroyed, and Centenius died fighting. Abandoning Capua to its fate, Hannibal marched to Apulia in search of another Roman army. Soon enough, both consuls returned to Capua and continued the siege. They amassed large amounts of supplies in Casilinum and established strongholds along the river Volturnus. This allowed them to easily resupply the armies along the river. The two consuls were joined by a praetor, Claudius Nero, and his 2 legions. The combined armies, or around 60,000 men, began constructing a wall around Capua, hoping to completely encircle the city. Before the wall was finished, the Capuans sent a final plea to Hannibal, but he had other matters to attend to. The brother of the consul Flaccus was carelessly leading an army in Apulia. Hannibal got word of his movements and set up a trap near Herdonia. Similar to the Battle of Trebia, Hannibal concealed a force of 3,000 light infantry in the nearby forest. Once the battle began, the concealed troops sprang from the trap and the Roman army was encircled. Seeing their approach, Flaccus fled from the field and his army was destroyed. An estimated 16,000 Romans perished. The survivors were sent to Sicily to join the survivors from Cannae, still serving on the island. Following this victory, Hannibal marched off to Brundisium, hoping to capture it by treachery. Before the walls around Capua were closed, any citizen who surrendered voluntarily was promised a pardon. None responded, and the walls closed around them. In 211, the 3 generals stayed in command, and the capture of Capua remained a top priority for the Romans. The Capuan cavalry still posed a significant problem for the Roman armies until a centurion, Quintus Naevius, came up with an ingenious solution. A line of velites would march behind the cavalry, creating a moving wall. The retreating Roman horse could fall back behind the velites and regroup for another charge. This finally gave the Romans an advantage. Hannibal was now the only hope for Capua, and he once again rushed to Campania to aid the city. He still held the advantage on open ground, but the Romans refused to leave their fortifications. A desperate charge onto the fortifications was unsuccessful, and Hannibal tried a different approach. He marched his forces to the gates of Rome, hoping to lure the legions away from Capua. However, while his army was formidable on open terrain, it didn't pose a threat to the strong walls of Rome. Lacking supplies, he was soon forced to lift the siege. Unable to further assist Capua, he marched off to southern Italy. Seeing their last hopes dwindle, the Capuans had no choice but to surrender and open the gates. 53 Capuan senators were held responsible for the rebellion and executed on the orders of Fulvius Flaccus. The Roman Senate dissolved Capua as a city-state and appointed a Roman governor. Hannibal's strongest ally in Italy was now defeated, and his foothold in Campania was gone. Capua would never recover from this defeat, and Neapolis, later named Naples, would rise to the position of chief city in Campania. As we have already stated, the Roman ability to press from all sides simultaneously could not be matched by Hannibal. Avoiding pitched battles at all costs ensured that Roman losses stayed at a minimum. Few victories Hannibal did get were small in scale and ultimately inconsequential. His Italian allies were quickly realizing that they had little hope of aid from the Punic force. Additionally, those who surrendered voluntarily were treated favorably by the Romans. Without losing a single battle, Hannibal's allies were slowly defecting and his hold over Italy was shrinking. We should leave Hannibal for now and turn to Syracuse and the Sicilian theater. During Hiero's life, Syracuse enjoyed a long 50-year period of stability. Throughout that time, he remained loyal to Rome, enjoying a privileged position in the alliance. However, following his death in 215 BCE, the city devolved into infighting, all too common in the Greek city-states of the era. He was succeeded by his young grandson Hieronymus, who was quickly deposed. The elite established a shaky democracy in the city. Two Syracusan brothers who had previously served under Hannibal, Hippocrates and Epicides, first took control of the army and then the city in 214. They allied with their former general Hannibal, making confrontation with Rome inevitable. Following his successful defense of Nola, Marcellus was sent to Sicily during his consulship in 214. He stayed in command of the army the following year, choosing to launch a direct assault on Syracuse. We are told that the famous mathematician Archimedes constructed ingenious war machines capable of easily repelling the Roman advance. Assaulting a city as strongly fortified as Syracuse was always a challenge, and after suffering heavy losses, Marcellus backed down. He blockaded the city instead and settled in for a lengthy siege. The Carthaginians sent aid to their new allies, and a large army, numbering 25,000 infantry, 3,000 cavalry, and 12 war elephants landed in Heraclea Minoa. This army was led by the Punic general Himilco. He marched east along the coast and captured Agrigentum. Several Sicilian towns, seeing better prospects on the Carthaginian side, betrayed Rome and joined Himilco. Hoping to stop further defections, the Romans massacred the population of Enna. This brutal act backfired, and even more cities joined the Carthaginian side. Hippocrates led a large army out of Syracuse, hoping to merge forces with Himilco, but he was spotted by Marcellus. Most of his 10,000 infantry were killed or captured, while he managed to escape with 500 cavalry. Although this sizable Carthaginian army now moved close to Syracuse, they didn't chase off the Romans, who maintained their siege of the city. Instead of attacking the Roman position, the Carthaginians marched towards other towns in hopes of persuading them to join their side. Marcellus had no hopes of taking Syracuse by direct assault, and the siege was unlikely to break the city while it was being resupplied from the sea. This left him with few viable options. During a festival to the goddess Artemis in 212, Epicides distributed large amounts of wine to his citizens as compensation for the lack of food. Marcellus took this opportunity and sent a small party to scale the city walls. They successfully opened the gates from the inside, letting the bulk of the Roman army into the city. Syracuse was a large city with several walled-off sections. The Romans successfully captured the outer part, but the citadel and the docks remained in Greek hands. Himilco now rushed back to Syracuse to threaten the Roman army, but a disease outbreak struck his camp. Both Himilco and Hippocrates died from the disease, along with the bulk of the army. The remnants were in no condition to fight and had to fall back. Syracuse was once again dependent on shipments of food from Carthage. In late 212, Bomilcar led a massive merchant convoy supported by 150 warships to the city. Seeing a Roman fleet gathered in front of the harbor spooked Bomilcar, and he instead sailed to the recently captured Tarentum. The number of Roman ships assembled by Marcellus is unknown, but it is believed that his fleet was noticeably smaller. The last hope for Syracuse was now gone, and Epicides fled to Agrigentum. The citadel was betrayed by a Spanish officer who opened the gates, and the city finally fell. While plundering, the Roman soldiers had orders to take Archimedes alive, but he refused to move while working on a math problem. This angered the Roman soldier, who then killed the great polymath. According to legend, Archimedes' last words were, "Do not disturb my circles." The Carthaginian foothold on Sicily was now concentrated around Agrigentum, with another Carthaginian, Hanno, and Epicides in command. Hannibal sent some reinforcements from Italy, including a commander of Numidian cavalry, Mutinees. Mutinees was a capable general, and he won several large skirmishes against Marcellus. He also led successful raids against numerous villages in the area. Seeing his successes, many communities switched to the Carthaginian side. But while he was winning over the soldiers and the Sicilian population, Mutinees was garnering envy from the Punic commanders. In late 211 BCE, Marcellus returned to Rome to hold a consulship the following year. Due to his harsh treatment of Syracuse, he was assigned to the Italian campaign, while his colleague Marcus Valerius Laevinus was sent into Sicily. The Carthaginians sent a new force of 8,000 infantry and 3,000 Numidian cavalry to reinforce Agrigentum. Nonetheless, Laevinus chose to directly attack the city. Prior to his arrival at Agrigentum, the envious Carthaginian generals removed mutinies from the head of the Numidians. However, the men remained loyal to him, and upon the approach of the Romans, mutinies opened the gates and let them into the city. The last Carthaginian stronghold on Sicily was taken with ease. In the aftermath, 40 cities surrendered voluntarily, 20 were betrayed to the Romans, and only 6 had to be taken by assault. The battle for Sicily ended in a complete Roman victory. Mutinees was rewarded with Roman citizenship and appointed commander of the auxiliary forces. The Spanish general and his men who betrayed Syracuse were also granted citizenship and new lands in Sicily. The leaders of cities that voluntarily surrendered were also rewarded, while those who resisted were punished harshly. The resources, and especially the grain, coming in from Sicily would aid the Roman recovery in the later years of the Second Punic War. The Sicilian campaign illustrates the incompetence of Punic commanders. Aside from Hannibal and his officers, the Carthaginians could rarely beat the Roman forces on the field. The inaction of Himilco and Bomilcar doomed Syracuse, while the infighting among the generals in Agrigentum cost Carthage its last foothold on Sicily. We should now look to the east and the actions of the Macedonian king. Stirred up by Demetrius of Paphos, an Illyrian general and an old enemy of Rome, young King Philip V was growing wary of the Roman presence in Illyria. Emboldened by the disaster at Cannae, Philip joined into an alliance with Hannibal, sparking the First Macedonian War. At that time, Macedonia was not much larger than it had been before Philip II and his son, Alexander the Great. The Macedonians were embroiled in a war with the Aetolian League, an alliance of Greek city-states. Demetrius, seeking an opportunity to regain his kingdom, urged the young king to make peace with the Greeks and advance on the Roman strongholds of Apollonia and Epidamnos. Philip built a fleet of 100 small galleys, hoping to take the cities by surprise. However, his plans were thwarted when a messenger sent to form an alliance with Hannibal was captured while crossing the Adriatic. A large squadron of Roman quinqueremes was stationed near Brundisium, and Philip's plan to strike from the sea was left dead in the water. In 215 BC, Romans sent a praetor, Marcus Valerius Laevinus, to Brundisium, with 2 legions to guard the crossing into Italy. Laevinus would go on to capture Agrigentum later in the war, but for now he was assigned to the Macedonian campaign. He was supported by around 50 quinqueremes. In 214, Philip launched surprise attacks on Apollonia and Oricum. He couldn't capture Apollonia, but a smaller Oricum was an easy target. Laevinus then crossed the Adriatic and expelled the Macedonians from Oricum. He subsequently relieved Apollonia and took up a defensive position in the city. Beaten back, the Macedonians didn't commit any further attacks on the Roman strongholds in Illyria. The Greek theater was different from the other parts of the Second Punic War. The Romans had only a limited presence in Greece, and the First Macedonian War was mostly a conflict between the Greeks and the Macedonians. In 211, the Romans sent a delegation to the Aetolian League, and they formed an alliance. The terms of this alliance are partially preserved on an inscription found in the Greek region of Acarnaria. The Aetolian League agreed to resume fighting against Philip with the support of at least 25 Roman quinqueremes. All territorial gains were to belong to the League, while the Romans were entitled to the captured spoils. This alliance ensured that Philip was preoccupied in Greece and unable to send an army into Italy. The attacks came suddenly, with Aetolians and Romans raiding coastal communities, while Illyrian chieftains made forays into northern Macedonia. Philip responded quickly to all these threats. The Macedonians had a professional army of 20,000 strong, the core of which was the Macedonian phalanx that had conquered the known world not so long ago. Philip rode at the head of his cavalry, reminiscent of his great predecessor. He managed to push back the enemy on several occasions, but the Aetolians never gathered their forces in one place, but rather chose to divide their men into numerous raiding parties. The First Macedonian War soon evolved into a regional conflict engulfing most of the Aegean. By the end of 210 BCE, Elis, Sparta, and Pergamon joined the Aetolians, while the Achaean League sided with the Macedonians. That year, Livinus left Greece to serve as consul. During his term, he disbanded the remaining Roman legions still stationed in Apollonia. This just shows how little the Romans were actually invested in this conflict. Their main priority was, and still is, the large Carthaginian army freely roaming across Italy. Despite this disregard, Philip V was slowly but surely gaining the upper hand in Greece. Livy claims that Athens, the Ptolemies, and the island of Rhodes all sent delegations to Philip to urge him to stop his advance. If he conquered the League, he would gain an overwhelming power base in Greece, opening the doors to another power struggle among the Hellenistic kings of the Eastern Mediterranean. Despite this, Philip pushed on, and in 207 led a successful foray into the Aetolian League. In the same year, a reformed Achaean army shattered the Spartan forces in the Battle of Mantinea. Unlike the Romans, the Greek states were unwilling to continue fighting after a couple of crushing defeats, and the Aetolian League sued for peace in 206. The Romans now renewed their presence in the area, but they were still only interested in defending their holdings. They refused Philip's challenges to a pitched battle and remained safely behind the strong walls of Apollonia. With this stalemate unlikely to change, the two powers agreed on a peace treaty. Unlike any other Roman war up to this point, the First Macedonian War didn't end in complete surrender of one side. The Romans and the Macedonians agreed on peace terms as equals. Although the Romans managed to prevent Philip from aiding Hannibal at minimal cost, the vengeful Romans were not quick to forget the opportunistic alliance between Carthage and Macedonia during their greatest crisis. The stage was now set for the continuation of this conflict, but the Romans first had to deal with Hannibal. For all this time, we have neglected to talk about Iberia. Back when Hannibal first crossed the Alps, a Roman army under Scipio Calvus was sent into Spain. While Hannibal was winning major victories in Italy, his primary power base was threatened by the Scipio family. Their efforts proved crucial for Rome, as they delayed any potential reinforcements from the region. Join us next time as we discuss the Spanish campaign in detail. Seeing their approach, Flaccus fled from the field. Seeing their approach, Flaccus fled